My name is Claire Morgan, and the night my husband's family was dragged out of that warehouse in handcuffs, the lead agent turned to me and said, "Marshal, they're all yours." Their faces, those same faces that mocked me for years, went pale as snow. My mother-in-law couldn't even speak. My brother-in-law dropped to his knees, and my husband, he finally understood who I really was. But that moment didn't come out of nowhere. It came from decades really, of being the quiet one in a family that never cared to know me beyond their own assumptions. I wasn't always a U.S. Marshal, and they never imagined I could be one. I suppose I should start where the unraveling began, long before the flashing lights, long before I stood in that cold warehouse with a badge shining under the floodlamps. It started on a Sunday. I still remember that afternoon, clearly, Ohio skies heavy with gray, the kind that make the whole world feel like wet concrete. My husband Mark insisted we visit his family for dinner. I'd hoped foolishly that maybe this time things would be different, that they would finally treat me like something more than a bystander in their perfect little world. We pulled up to the old brick house, his mother's pride, a house she constantly compared to ours, usually with some passive comment, like some people like small living. She never said my name when she insulted me. She didn't need to. Everyone knew who she meant. As soon as I stepped through the door, the comments began. "She's too soft," his aunt whispered loudly in the kitchen. "Too gentle. She wouldn't last a day in real life." Real life? As if mine wasn't. Then came the one that stuck with me most. "Too weak to survive in our world," my mother-in-law said as she wiped her hands on a kitchen towel, not even bothering to hide her disdain. I kept my face calm, soft, like they liked to think I was. I had to. At the time, I was working undercover on a case involving two fugitives who'd slipped across state lines. My entire job depended on being able to blend in. I'd spent years perfecting the ability to let people underestimate me. But it still stung. Mark set the table trying to ease the tension, but there was no fixing something so deeply rooted. His family didn't dislike me. They disrespected me. There's a difference. His brother Danny strutted through the dining room, wearing a brand new Rolex he'd bought from a friend. I remember glancing at the watch and immediately noticing the telltale markers of a money laundering operation I'd studied years earlier. But of course, I said nothing. Not yet. Danny dropped into his chair with a smirk. Claire, still working that paper-pushing job, must be nice not having real stress. Paper pushing. If only he knew. At that time, I had just finished a 2-month assignment, transporting a high-risk prisoner who had threatened my life 3 times. I'd testified in federal court. I'd been in standoffs, sting operations, in long, freezing night patrols. But I smiled politely and sipped my water. Let him think whatever he wanted. The truth was confidential, and even Mark didn't fully understand the scope of my work. Not because I didn't trust him, but because it wasn't safe. Not for him, not for anyone. I'd learned early in my career that silence could be both shield and weapon. After dinner, I slipped out onto the back porch to breathe for a moment. The neighborhood kids were playing basketball across the alley, their laughter echoing off garage doors. A dog barked somewhere behind the fence. Ordinary sounds that reminded me of who I was underneath the badge. Mark joined me, leaning on the railing beside me. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "They don't mean harm." I looked at him, really looked at him. "Mark, they do." He didn't argue. For once, he didn't defend them. He just sighed. We drove home in silence. Later that night, as I was folding laundry, my phone vibrated. It was my supervisor, Chief Deputy Ramos. "Claire," he said, voice low, "I'm sending you a file. It's sensitive. Very." My stomach tightened. "Understood," I replied. A minute later, a secure message buzzed through with a digital folder attached. I opened it and froze. The last name on the primary suspect. Dean Lennox. My husband's family name. I sat down on the edge of the bed, pulse pounding. The document detailed suspicious financial transfers, warehouse rentals, and connections to a trafficking case 2 states over. And, at the center of it, Daniel Lennox, Danny, my brother-in-law, the one with the Rolex, the one who mocked me the most. I breathed slowly, forcing myself to stay steady. This wasn't personal. It couldn't be personal. Duty was duty, and justice had no room for favoritism. But I also knew something else if Danny was involved. He wasn't working alone. I spent the rest of the night reviewing every page, every timestamp, every photo. My training kicked in, methodical, precise, unemotional, yet my heart hurt. I thought of the comments made earlier that day, how they snickered while passing dishes across the table. Too soft, too weak, not built for their world. Their world. If only they knew the world I lived in, the dangers I faced, the lives I'd saved, the fugitives I'd put behind bars. By sunrise, I had made my decision. I would request assignment to the case. I would do my job, and I would not let family ties obscure justice. When Mark woke up and saw me still dressed in yesterday's clothes, coffee gone cold beside me, he frowned. "Claire, are you okay?" "I will be," I answered. It wasn't a lie, just not the whole truth. He touched my shoulder gently. "You know, I wish they understood who you are." I closed the file and looked at him with tired eyes. "They will, Mark, one day." I didn't know then how true that would become. But that day, the day they would see me for who I really was, would not be the way any of us expected. I didn't sleep much after reviewing the file with Danny's name on it. Even when I finally closed my eyes for a short hour, my mind replayed every comment, every smirk, every dismissive look his family had thrown my way over the years. It's strange how small moments, tiny cuts, collect quietly until a day comes when they all sting at once. Monday morning came with its usual Midwest chill. I brewed coffee, the kind Mark always said tasted like jet fuel, but he drank it anyway. He kissed my forehead before leaving for work, unaware of the storm brewing under our roof. I watched him pull out of the driveway, the old Ford, sputtering the way it always had. A humble life, a simple house. All the things his family looked down on because they assumed I couldn't aspire to more. Still, I loved the quiet of our home, the bird feeder outside the window, the hum of the neighbor's lawnmower, the mailman who always waved. Real American life. Steady, familiar, comforting. Once Mark's truck turned the corner, I locked the door behind him, sat at the dining table, and opened the case file again. Pages and pages of financial inconsistencies, warehouse codes, transaction sheets, and one picture that told me everything I needed to know. Danny standing outside a warehouse on the outskirts of Toledo at 2:14 a.m., meeting a man clearly known to the DEA. I whispered under my breath, "Danny, what did you get yourself into?" By late morning, I was pulling into the U.S. Marshal's field office. The lot was already full agents grabbing gear, checking cars, heading out for prisoner transports or fugitive pickups. Most folks think it's all high-speed chases and dramatic raids, but truthfully, 90% of the job is paperwork, interviews, logistics, and endless coordination. Inside, Deputy Chief Ramos was waiting for me leaning against the glass door of the briefing room. "You read the file?" he asked. I nodded. "Yes, sir." "And you still want it?" "Yes." He held my gaze a moment longer. "Then let's talk." We stepped into the briefing room, where a map of northern Ohio covered the wall, warehouse districts marked with pins, photos of suspects, lines of connection drawn with red string. It wasn't a massive cartel, not yet, but it was organized enough to be dangerous, structured, expanding. Ramos pointed to the center photo, Danny. "This one," he said, "is getting sloppy. He's been spending money too fast, talking too loud, showing up in places he shouldn't. We've been watching him for almost a year. Your assignment is sensitive because of your proximity." I nodded again. Understood. "Claire," he added quietly, "if it becomes too personal, you step back. You tell me. No hesitation." "I will." He studied me, then said, "Let's continue." And just like that, we stepped into full professional mode. Hours passed as we reviewed surveillance footage, examined financial trails, and connected dots. I contributed what I knew about the Lennox family's routine, where they gathered who handled money, which businesses were legitimate, and which always felt off. I provided details. Others might overlook the way Danny boasted at dinners, the side conversations between his mother and an unknown caller, the cash-only family business they'd always kept vague. This wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was a pattern that led straight to federal offenses. By mid-afternoon, when most people my age would be thinking about slow cookers and early dinners, I was studying a spreadsheet that clearly showed 6 months of laundered transactions. The sums were too large to ignore and too well-timed to be coincidence. Around 4, I took a walk outside to clear my head. The parking lot smelled like cut grass, and a freight train rumbled not far away. The air felt heavy, like Ohio summers often do, but it grounded me. I knew my next steps. When I got home, Mark was already on the couch eating leftover pasta. He brightened when he saw me, but the brightness dimmed quickly. "You're distant today," he said gently. I sat beside him. "Just work." He studied my face. "Hard day." I looked at him for a long moment, wondering how much I could say without crossing ethical lines. Then I chose honesty, at least the part I was allowed to share. "I saw something today," I said quietly. "Something connected to your family." His shoulders stiffened almost immediately. "What do you mean?" "Not something you did," I clarified quickly, "but something I have to handle carefully." He swallowed hard. I could see fear, the quiet dread of a man who had always suspected his family might not be as clean as they claimed. "My mother," he whispered. "Danny." I can't say I replied, and it hurt to shut him out, but it was necessary. "But Mark, things might get difficult." He looked down at his hands. "I always knew something was off," he admitted. "I guess I just never wanted to face it." There it was, the truth he'd buried beneath loyalty and denial. I reached for his hand gently. "Just trust me. Trust that I'm doing what's right." He nodded slowly. "I trust you, Claire. I always have." The rest of the evening passed quietly. He went to bed early, exhausted from worry, and I stayed up reviewing documents again. I knew the next step would bring me deeper into territory that blurred the line between my personal and professional life. But justice didn't care about bloodlines. It never had. And neither could I. As midnight approached, a message pinged on my secure phone. Surveillance scheduled. Warehouse. 17. Tomorrow night. My pulse stirred, calm, steady, ready. Tomorrow would be the first time I'd see Danny, not as my brother-in-law, but as a suspect. The next day moved with the slow heaviness of anticipation, the kind that sits on your chest and refuses to leave. I went through the motions of my morning coffee, a brief walk around the neighborhood, checking the mail, but everything felt strangely distant, like I was moving through a hallway of mirrors. Every reflection pointed back to the same truth. Tonight would be the beginning of the end. When I arrived at the Marshal office, the air was different, more alert, more focused. You could feel it when you walked through the door, agents speaking in clipped tones, phones ringing nonstop, boots moving fast across the concrete floor. Operations nights always felt like that, a mix of tension, discipline, and quiet adrenaline. Ramos waved me over. "Good. You're early," he said. "Let's go over tonight." We stepped into the briefing room. Maps covered the walls, and a large monitor displayed Warehouse 17, Danny's meeting point. The building sat on the edge of an industrial district, where the city seemed to forget itself. Cracked pavement, rusted signage, railroad tracks, running behind overgrown lots. A far cry from the polished family dinners, where Danny bragged about business deals he never explained. Ramos tapped the screen. "He'll be there at 9. Our informant confirms he's moving product tonight. Cash and merchandise out." Classic laundering sequence. My stomach turned, not out of fear, but sadness. A quiet sadness for the wasted chances, the dishonest life he'd built. But sadness didn't absolve wrongdoing, and it certainly didn't excuse the harm. I asked, "Who's he meeting?" Ramos clicked to another photo. A man with deep-set eyes and a shaved head. Jared Michaels. DEA has been after him for 4 years. Quiet operator, but dangerous. I took a steady breath. So this is bigger than Danny. Much bigger. We reviewed assignments, entry points, backup units, radio frequencies, contingencies. As lead, I'd be responsible for coordinating movement once the warrant was activated. It wasn't the first time I'd run an operation like this, but it was the first time it intersected so painfully with my personal life. One of the younger deputies approached me afterward. "Marshal Morgan, if you need us to handle the close-up, we can." I appreciated his sincerity. "Thank you," I said, "but I'll manage." I had to. If I stepped aside, I'd never forgive myself. I spent the afternoon reviewing surveillance logs. The footage showed Danny entering the warehouse on 3 separate nights. Each time, he looked more confident, more careless. Sloppiness was always a criminal's downfall. By 5 o'clock, I went home to get ready. Mark's truck wasn't in the driveway. He'd texted earlier saying he was visiting a friend. I wasn't sure if that was true, or if he was simply trying to process what I had hinted the night before. Either way, it was a relief. I didn't need him seeing the tactical gear, the vest, the weapon. I didn't need questions I couldn't answer. I changed clothes in silence. Black pants, dark shirt, secure vest. The gun belt felt familiar against my hip, the badge heavier than usual, as though it understood the weight of what tonight meant. Before leaving, I paused in the living room. The old recliner Mark had inherited from his father sat in the corner. The family photos on the wall seemed to watch me as I locked the door behind me. The drive to the warehouse district was long and quiet. Ohio's flat roads stretched ahead, lined with cornfields that looked silver in the late afternoon light. I passed the gas station where older men gathered every morning with coffee and newspapers. I passed the hardware store where the same cashier had worked for 3 decades. Real, ordinary life. A life that crime, especially organized crime, tore apart piece by piece. By the time I arrived, the sun was sinking behind the industrial buildings. Agents were already staged, nearby hiding in unmarked SUVs and vans. We exchanged subtle nods as I walked toward the operations vehicle. Ramos handed me a headset. Audio check. Copy, I replied. Tonight we move carefully. We need Danny alive. And we need Michaels even more. I took my position behind a stack of rusted shipping crates across from the warehouse. The air smelled of metal rain-soaked dirt and old chemicals. A freight train horn sounded somewhere in the distance. At 9:03 p.m., headlights appeared. Danny's car. He stepped out, wearing that same smug swagger he always had. Except tonight, there was an edge to it. A nervous edge. He looked around too often, kept adjusting his jacket, pulled out his phone twice, but didn't make a call. He didn't see me. Not yet. Minutes later, another truck pulled up. Jared Michaels climbed out carrying a duffel bag. 2 more men followed him. Armed. Alert. Team stand by, I whispered. Danny approached Michaels, trying to look tough. But I knew him. I knew the tremor in his hands, the way he swallowed hard when he was out of his depth. He was in far deeper than he realized. Michaels opened the duffel bag, revealing stacks of cash. Danny visibly exhaled, like a kid getting away with a prank. That was enough. I raised my hand. Go. The response was immediate. Lights, voices, boots hitting concrete. U.S. Marshals, show me your hands. Pandemonium. Michaels bolted toward the back exit, but was tackled by 2 deputies. One of his men reached for a weapon, disarmed in seconds. Danny froze hands, shaking face, draining of all color. I stepped forward, badge held high. He stared at me, like he didn't recognize me. See, Claire. What is this? Put your hands where I can see them, I said, voice steady. He couldn't finish the sentence. Yes, Danny. The same woman you mocked. The same woman you dismissed. The same woman you laughed at behind closed doors. I cuffed him myself. As I led him toward the vehicles, tears streamed down his face. Please, Claire, please, don't do this. I'm doing my job, I said quietly. And for the first time in his life, he believed me. The night after the warehouse raid felt like 2 separate worlds colliding inside my chest. On one hand, it was routine, another operation, another arrest, another case, moving forward. On the other hand, it was the unraveling of a family whose faces I had sat across from at Thanksgiving birthdays and Sunday dinners for nearly a decade. It's a strange, lonely feeling when professional duty pierces straight through the walls of home. The morning sun broke through before I finally fell asleep. Only a couple of hours passed before I woke, again instinctively alert, the way every Marshal gets used to over the years. Habit makes you conscious of the smallest sounds, a car passing too slowly, footsteps outside the click of mail hitting the box. But that morning, it wasn't danger that woke me. It was silence from Mark. He didn't come home. I checked the driveway, no truck. Checked my phone, no missed calls. He wasn't a man who stayed out late. He wasn't a drinker, not a gambler, not someone who vanished to avoid conversation. But he was a man dealing with the shock of discovering his brother had been laundering money in the shadows while insisting to the world that he was a self-made businessman. I considered calling him, but stopped. Let him have the space. The coming days would shake him in ways he couldn't yet imagine. By mid-morning, I was back at the Marshal office. Agents were already at their desks, some joking quietly over stale donuts, others filling out reports with the usual sighs of caffeine and exhaustion. Life in law enforcement doesn't slow down, even after emotional nights. If anything, it gets busier. Ramos waved me into his office. "Morning, Morgan. Sit." His tone told me enough. There was more. He pulled up a screen. More documents, more financial passages, more names. "You were right," he said, tapping a line highlighted in yellow. "This goes deeper than Danny." I scanned the page, and a cold ripple moved down my spine. The business license listed under the Shell Corporation. Lennox Family Supplies. Registered owner: Elaine Lennox. My mother-in-law. The woman who once told me my lasagna tasted like a recipe someone read but never understood. The woman who believed softness meant ignorance. The woman who assumed I lived a small life because she never imagined I could live anything more. I whispered, "This can't be real." "It is," Ramos replied. "And we think she's been laundering funds through her retail shops for years. Low tax lots of cash flow. Perfect setup." I leaned back, pressing a hand against my forehead. The file blurred for a moment. This was no longer just about Danny. It was systemic, organized, calculated, and worse yet, intertwined with every holiday, every argument, every polite conversation across the dinner table. Claire Ramos said gently, "Are you still able to lead the case? If not, we reassign." I breathed in slowly, the way my academy instructor had taught us during firearms training. Inhale for 4, hold for 2, exhale for 4. "I can handle it," I said, "but I need to do it by the book." "Good, because the U.S. Attorney wants us to dig deeper. No arrests on Elaine until we have a chain of evidence." My hands tightened. I knew what that meant. Surveillance, observations, undercover presence. And who better to blend in unnoticed than the woman the family believed was too soft to survive? That afternoon, I drove through Elaine's shop district. She owned 3 small stores: a craft shop, a party supply store, and a discount home goods shop. All tidy, all family-friendly. All the kind of places older American women visited for craft nights, quilting groups, or holiday centerpieces. From the outside, they looked like every other small-town business. But the flow of deposits didn't lie. I parked across from the craft store in an unmarked sedan. Through the front window, I watched Elaine greet customers with her usual charm, tight smile, bright clothes, and an air of someone who believed she held the moral high ground in every conversation. If only the customers knew the truth. Throughout the week, I rotated surveillance, sometimes outside the shops, sometimes following her supplier routes, sometimes blending in as a customer. Aging women on fixed incomes bought yarn and plastic floral arrangements. Kids begged for party balloons. Retirees browsed greeting cards. Normal American life unfolded around me, peaceful and familiar. But beneath the surface, I watched the movement of unregistered shipments, bags moving in after hours, cash deposits that didn't match receipt logs, conversations occurring behind closed storerooms, and messages exchanged with numbers linked to the very men we arrested at the warehouse. The more I watched, the clearer it became she wasn't ignorant. She was involved. One evening, I slipped into her shop in plain clothes to purchase a roll of ribbon and observe inventory patterns. Elaine recognized me immediately. "Oh," she said, voice thin, "it's you." "Just picking up something for a project," I replied with a friendly smile. She narrowed her eyes. "Crafting now, that's new. It's never too late to learn." She scoffed lightly. "You always did have simple hobbies." Her words used to hurt. Now they merely floated past me like dust in sunlight. She rang up the ribbon. Her hands shook slightly, and for the first time, I wondered if part of her sensed something was wrong, if she knew someone was circling around her secrets. She handed me the bag. "Tell Mark to call me. I'll let him know I said, 'Have a good night.'" When I left, I saw two men slipping into the back alley behind the shop. One held a crate. The other carried a duffel bag. Neither belonged to the store's employee list. I positioned myself behind the parked cars, listening through my audio device. One man whispered, "She wants it dropped off by tomorrow. No mistakes." Got it. Elaine's involvement was no longer just suspicion. It was fact. That night at home, Mark finally returned. His face was pale, his eyes red from lack of sleep. He sat at the kitchen table. I heard Danny was denied bail. I nodded. He stared at his hands. Did you arrest him?" "Yes." A long silence. "I don't know how to feel," he said. "Part of me is angry. Part of me is ashamed. And part of me is scared. What else am I going to find out?" I hesitated. The truth hovered between us, fragile as a spider web. "You'll need to brace yourself," I whispered. "There's more coming." He swallowed, then nodded slowly. "I trust you, even if the truth breaks everything else." His words hit me hard. Trust from a spouse isn't something you take lightly. And trust built during crisis, that's a weight few people understand. But the storm wasn't over. It was just beginning. I woke before sunrise the next morning, not because of an alarm, but because of the ache in my chest, a heaviness born from the kind of truths you can't outrun. As a marshal, you get used to secrets. But when the secrets belong to the people you once sat elbow to elbow with at holiday dinners, the weight hits differently. I brewed coffee and stared out the kitchen window. The neighborhood was quiet. An older couple 2 houses down was already walking their dog. The mail truck humming slowly down the street. Kids waiting for the school bus at the corner. Normal American life unfolding just as it had for decades. That normalcy used to comfort me. Now it felt like a reminder of how deeply my worlds were splitting apart. Mark came down the stairs, looking like he'd aged 10 years overnight. He poured himself coffee and sat across from me without a word. The silence wasn't hostile. It was heavy, fractured, cautious. Finally he said, "You weren't home last night." "I was working surveillance." He stared at the mug in his hands. "Is it still about my family?" I didn't answer. Silence was answer enough. He closed his eyes briefly. "Claire, if my mother is involved..." I held up a hand gently. "Mark, I can't confirm anything. You know that." His jaw tightened. "But you also aren't denying it." I didn't. I couldn't. And that hurt him more than anything else could have. He exhaled shakily. "Just promise you'll tell me when you can." "I will." We lingered in that quiet for a moment before I stood, kissed his cheek, and left for the office. At the Marshal service, the atmosphere had shifted even more. Phones rang nonstop. Agents hurried between offices with updated reports, and the tension in the air was thick enough to feel in your bones. Ramos called me in immediately. "We've uncovered more," he said, motioning me toward the monitor. There, in black and white, were bank statements linking Elaine's stores to a network of shell companies stretching across 3 states. Not just laundering, financing, facilitating transportation. A whole network hiding behind craft paper and holiday decorations. I said quietly, she knew exactly what she was doing. Ramos nodded solemnly. "This isn't ignorance. This is enterprise." The next part was procedural, but excruciating. being formally assigned to continue leading surveillance, even though this case had become more personal than any I'd ever touched. "You sure you can handle this, Morgan?" he asked. I answered. "I have to." We spent hours reviewing camera footage, transaction logs, and even customer receipts. Every new detail tightened the knot in my chest. Elaine had built this operation slowly, methodically. She hid illegal shipments behind pallets of legitimate merchandise. She used her reputation as a church-going, small-town businesswoman as a shield. She took advantage of trust, particularly from older customers who never questioned mixed shipments or cash-heavy practices. And the worst part, she'd done it right in front of me, year after year. Around noon, I left with 2 deputies for a mobile surveillance shift. We parked near the back alley behind her party supply store. Windows cracked just enough to hear conversations. Delivery trucks came and went. Customers entered with birthday lists and came out with bags full of streamers and candles. Nothing looked suspicious on the surface. But crime rarely shows its face to the casual observer. Around 3 o'clock, we saw her. Elaine stepped outside with 2 boxes. She waved at a delivery driver, too casually, too rehearsed. He quickly moved the boxes to the back of his truck. They weren't on the delivery manifest. I knew that because we had already obtained the manifest through legal channels. We snapped photos, logged timestamps, collected audio. One deputy whispered, "She's orchestrating the whole thing." I nodded slowly, yes. When Elaine disappeared back inside, I stepped out of the car and took a long breath. The Ohio wind carried the scent of cardboard dust and asphalt. It was the scent of a town that trusted its shopkeepers, its families, its familiar faces, and she had exploited that trust. Later that afternoon, I returned to headquarters and met with the U.S. Attorney's team. Their file on Elaine was growing by the hour. They needed more before issuing warrants, but the direction was clear. She was central, not peripheral. As the meeting ended, one of the attorneys, a woman in her 60s, with a kind but steel-edged voice, leaned toward me. "Claire," she said quietly, "this is going to get very painful for you, but you're handling this with integrity. Remember that." Her words hit deeper than she probably realized. I left the office at sunset exhausted. The sky glowed orange and pink, casting long shadows over the empty parking lot. When I drove home, my heart pounded with every mile. I needed to talk to Mark, not about details I legally couldn't, but about what was coming. I found him sitting on the couch, staring at a muted news channel. He didn't look angry, just lost. He didn't turn his head when I entered. I saw the headlines he whispered, about the raid, the warehouse, the arrests. I sat beside him. "I know." His voice cracked. "My brother Claire, my brother." I reached for his hand. "I'm sorry." He looked at me, then eyes full of every emotion a man can feel. At once, betrayal, grief, fear, love, confusion. "Tell me the truth," he whispered. "Should I be worried about my mother?" The question froze me. I swallowed. "Mark, you need to prepare yourself." He closed his eyes, tears slipping onto his cheeks. "She wouldn't do something like this," he said weakly. But he didn't sound convinced. I squeezed his hand gently. Sometimes, people hide parts of themselves, even from their own children. He dropped his head into his hands. "My whole life. Has it been a lie?" "No," I said softly, "but some parts of it may have been." We sat there in silence for a long time, 2 people caught between duty and family love and truth. I wished I could shield him from what was coming. But justice wasn't a choice. It was a commitment. Later that night, after he finally went to bed, my secure phone buzzed yet again. A message from Ramos. We have confirmation. Elaine scheduled a shipment tomorrow night. I stared at the screen. Tomorrow night. The truth was coming, and there would be no stopping it. The following day felt like the longest day of my life. Every hour stretched thin, like the world was holding its breath, waiting for the moment when everything would come crashing down. I spent the morning at headquarters, reviewing surveillance footage and running over the plan a dozen times with the task force. But no amount of preparation could soften the truth. Tonight, I would be stepping into a battlefield where family and duty collided head-on. By late afternoon, the sky had gone gray, the kind of heavy, flat gray Ohio is famous for. The air smelled like rain, even though the forecast promised none. I drove home to grab fresh gear, every turn of the wheel, tightening the knot in my chest. When I walked into the house, Mark was sitting at the dining table, staring at an untouched cup of coffee. His hands were clasped together, elbows on the table, like he was bracing himself. He looked up slowly. You're leaving again tonight? It wasn't a question. Yes, I said gently. For the same case. I hesitated only a second. Yes. He swallowed hard, his eyes searching mine for something, hope, reassurance, maybe denial. I couldn't give him any. Claire, he said, voice breaking. Whatever happens, please remember that I'm trying. I didn't see any of this. I didn't want to see it. But I'm not my family. My throat tightened. I walked to him, placed my hands on his shoulders, and pressed a kiss to the top of his head. I know, I whispered, and that's why I'm still here. He held my hand for a long moment, then let go. There wasn't anything left to say. Not without crossing lines I wasn't allowed to cross. By 7:30 p.m., I was back at the operations van behind Elaine's shop district. The task force was settling into position. Radios crackled softly. The hum of generators filled the air. Deputies checked their weapons and gear with practiced motions. Ramos stood beside me, his expression hard but sympathetic. You good? He asked. I'm steady, I replied. He nodded. Tonight we get the final link. After we confirm the exchange, we secure warrants for the entire network. I exhaled slowly. Let's do it. At 8:41, headlights approached the alley behind Elaine's shop. A white van unmarked its windows, tinted. We watched from our concealed positions as two men climbed out, the same men we'd seen moving unregistered shipments days earlier. They opened the back of the van and pulled out 3 wooden crates. Heavy, too heavy for crafts or party supplies. A moment later, the back door of the shop opened. Elaine stepped out. Her bright blouse was replaced by a dark cardigan. Her hair, normally styled with too much spray, hung simply over her shoulders. She looked older in the low alley light, more fragile, but her voice, cold, clipped, authoritative, cut through the night air clearly. You're late, she snapped at the men. Traffic, one of them muttered. Unload everything. I need to lock up soon. She didn't look like a woman caught in a crime. She looked like someone running a business, her real business. As I watched her direct the men, something inside me twisted. This was the same woman who'd taught Sunday school for years, who'd made snide comments about my little job while passing the mashed potatoes, who'd lectured everyone on morals, respectability, and hard work. And here she was, in the shadows, doing something she knew could destroy her entire family. At 8:52, she opened one of the crates. Even from where we stood, we could see the contents, sealed packages wrapped in thick plastic. Ramos whispered into his mic, That's it. We have visual confirmation. Stand by. Elaine closed the crate and nodded to the men. Same routine. Move it fast. I don't want any delays this time. I took a deep breath and raised my hand. Move. The alley erupted. Flashlights burst through the darkness. Shouts bounced off brick walls. Boots hit pavement. Deputies surged forward in synchronized motion, their voices commanding. U.S. Marshals, hands in the air. The men dropped immediately, hitting the ground, with their palms spread wide. But Elaine, my mother-in-law, froze. For a long, suspended second, she didn't breathe, didn't blink, didn't move. Then slowly she turned, and her eyes met mine. Shock, recognition, disbelief, all poured across her face at once. Claire, she whispered. For years, she'd said my name with disdain. Tonight she said it like a confession. I stepped forward, badge held firmly at chest level. My voice was steady, professional, but quieter than usual. Elaine Lennox, you're under arrest for money laundering conspiracy to distribute controlled substances and aiding the transport of illegal goods across state lines. Her mouth trembled. No, this isn't Claire. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. She shook her head violently. You can't do this. We're family. I swallowed hard, breathing through the sting in my chest. You made choices, I said softly. And so did I. 2 female deputies approached her carefully. Elaine backed away, tears spilling down her face. Please, Claire, please don't. I'm doing my job, I whispered, just like I always have. She crumpled to her knees, sobbing as the deputies cuffed her. The alley fell quiet, except for radios and the distant rumble of a passing freight train. The men were secured. Evidence was cataloged, photos taken, statements logged. But the moment that burned itself into my memory was when Elaine looked up at me one last time, her face wet, broken, defeated. I never thought, she whispered. Not you. Anyone but you. I didn't answer. There was nothing left to say. By the time we loaded her into the transport vehicle, my hands were trembling, not from fear, but from the weight of everything collapsing at once. As the van doors closed, Ramos placed a hand on my shoulder. You held the line, he said quietly. Most people couldn't have. But inside, all I felt was the hollow ache of someone who knew this was only the beginning of the fallout, especially at home. When I got back to my car, my phone buzzed. A single message from Mark. Where are you? Mom just called. Crying. Saying you arrested her. Tell me it isn't true. I leaned against the car, closing my eyes, as pain washed over me. The truth was here, and it was about to break both of our worlds wide open. When I pulled into the driveway that night, Mark was already standing on the porch waiting for me. Porch light on arms, crossed chest, rising and falling too fast. The look on his face wasn't anger. It was the raw, stunned expression of a man whose world had broken in places he didn't know existed. I stepped out of the car, slowly, hands relaxed at my sides. He swallowed hard. Is it true? He whispered. Did you arrest her? The porch boards creaked as I moved closer. Yes. His jaw tightened. Claire, she was crying. She said you staged something. Said it was all a misunderstanding. She said. I shook my head gently. Mark, I know you love your mother. But she wasn't framed. She wasn't tricked. We caught her in the act. His breath trembled. How long? Years, I said quietly. Long enough that this wasn't an accident. He sat down on the porch step like someone had kicked the air out of him. My brother, my mother, both of them, criminals. I can't make sense of this. I sat beside him. You're not responsible for their choices. But I didn't see it, he said. That makes me feel blind. Or maybe just stupid. I rested my hand on his. You're not stupid. You believe the image they showed you. Most people would have done the same. He looked up at me, then eyes red, but steady. I want to ask one thing, and I need the truth. Did you ever try to warn me? I tried gently, I said, but I couldn't tell you details. The law doesn't allow it. He nodded slowly. I guess part of me knew something was off, but I didn't want to face it. We sat in silence, listening to the hum of cars passing on the main road, a dog barking somewhere down the block, the comforting buzz of a porch light attracting moths, ordinary sounds, familiar ones, and yet nothing felt ordinary anymore. He finally said, So, what happens now? Your mother and brother will have their day in court. They'll have representation. Evidence will be reviewed. The process will be fair. And you, he asked, voice shaking, what happens to you and me? I breathed in slowly. That's up to both of us. He lowered his head into his hands. I don't want to lose you. You won't, I whispered. But this is a wound we'll have to heal, slowly, carefully. He leaned against me, then shoulders shaking. I wrapped an arm around him. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was the first small act of choosing to live in truth, rather than the illusions his family had built around themselves. The next few weeks moved like a long, heavy storm. Court hearings, interviews, depositions, paperwork that felt endless, news stories that exaggerated details and mispronounced my name, but got the general idea right. It was a small Midwestern town scandal, and people loved a scandal. Through it all, Mark and I lived quietly. Tensions flared. Sometimes grief works its way out in unpredictable bursts, but there were also evenings when we sat together on the couch, the TV softly playing reruns, his head resting on my shoulder, as though holding on for balance. One afternoon, while reviewing case notes, I heard him open the front door and speak softly to someone outside. When he stepped back in, he had 2 foil-covered plates in his hands. Mrs. Thompson next door, he said. She said she made extra lasagna. Told me she heard about my family and wanted us to have something warm for dinner. I smiled a little. Small towns do have their good sides. He set the plates on the table, then reached for my hand. Claire, thank you for doing your job, for not hiding from the truth even when I wanted to. His voice cracked. And thank you for not giving up on us. I never intended to, I said softly. But we'll need to build from honesty. No more illusions, no more pretending we're fine when we're not. He nodded. I can do that. Later that week, I drove out to the courthouse to finalize another stack of documents. As I walked through the halls, I passed 2 elderly men sitting on a bench outside the clerk's office. One of them looked up at my badge and said, Marshal Morgan Wright heard about what you did. Took guts. The other man nodded. Takes courage to hold even family accountable. Not many folks can do that. Their words surprised me, not because of the praise, but because they understood. People over 60 know better than anyone. Real life isn't neat. Family isn't always kind. Doing the right thing often costs you something you weren't prepared to lose. That evening, I returned home and found Mark sitting in the backyard, staring at the fading light over the maple tree. He patted the seat beside him. Sit with me. I sat, and he slid his hand into mine. I want you to know something, he said. I still love my mother. I always will. But I also see what she did. I see the truth now. And I see you. All the things I missed before. I squeezed his hand. We're going to be okay. Maybe not right away, he said, but eventually. And I want us to work on that. I rested my head on his shoulder. So do I. The cicadas sang loud in the humidity. The sky turned deep blue. And for the first time in a long time, I felt the ground under my feet again. Justice had been done. Pain had been faced. Truth had been spoken aloud. But that wasn't the end. What mattered most was what came next. I turned to the imaginary listener in my mind, the one I always thought of when I told stories like this out loud. Someone older, someone who'd lived long enough to know that life doesn't always behave the way we want it to. And in my heart, I spoke words meant for them for you. Sometimes the strongest people are the ones who stay quiet until the moment silence becomes strength. Sometimes doing the right thing means standing alone in rooms where everyone misunderstands you. And sometimes the path to peace runs straight through truth, even when truth hurts. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been underestimated, dismissed, or pushed aside, I hope you'll share this with someone who needs courage tonight. And if you'd like to hear more true stories of quiet strength and justice, stay with me. We walk this road together.